Hello, welcome to Goodnight Flagstaff. I'm Caylene Finnicum from Colorado Springs, Colorado. The Lord of the Rings is such an epic and inspiring work of British literature, and I am so excited to be reading it with you all tonight. Thank you for tuning in to our community story time. You can find a new chapter from one of our favorite family-friendly books at 8 p.m. each weeknight on the Literary Center's YouTube channel and on Crater Radio, a local online radio station. The previous chapter is replayed on Crater Radio each weeknight at about 7:30, just before the new chapter airs. You can also listen to all previous Goodnight Flagstaff recordings on YouTube. We are currently reading The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkein. If you'd like to check it out to read along with us at home, it is available at the library. Check one out today with your Coconino County Library card. Please email us if you'd like to join our team of readers and connect with your community through stories. All ages are welcome. Our email is goodnightflagstaff@gmail.com. Last time we read together, with the battle done, Captain Faramir was able to finally question Frodo and Sam more thoroughly about their errand, for he was not altogether unaware, being the brother of Boromir. And Faramir told the hobbits of Boromir's demise, that he had seen him floating down the river. But there was one thing that Faramir pressed Frodo about, and that was Isildur's bane. Although Frodo could not tell him the answer, Faramir came close to guessing it while they walked to Faramir's hideout. Will he help Frodo, or hinder him? They walked on in silence for a while, passing like gray and green shadows under the old trees, their feet making no sound. Above them many birds sang, and the sun glistened on the polished roof of dark leaves in the evergreen woods of Ithilien. Sam had taken no part in the conversation, though he had listened, and at the same time he had attended with his keen hobbit ears to all the soft woodland noises about them. One thing he had noted, that in all the talk the name of Gollum had not once come up. He was glad, though he felt it was too much to hope that he would never hear it again. He soon became aware also that though they walked alone, there were many men close at hand. Not only Damrod and Magblun flitting in and out of the shadows ahead, but others on either side, all making their swift, secret way to some appointed place. Once, looking suddenly back as if some prickle of the skin told him that he was watched from behind, he thought he caught a brief glimpse of a small, dark shape slipping behind a tree trunk. He opened his mouth to speak and shut it again. "I'm not sure of it," he said to himself, "and why should I remind them of the old villain if they choose to forget him? I wish I could." So they passed on until the woodlands grew thinner and the land began to fall more steeply. Then they turned aside again to the right and came quickly to a small river in a narrow gorge. It was the same stream that trickled far above out of the round pool, now grown to a swift torrent, leaping down over many stones in a deep cloven bed, overhung with ilex and dark boxwoods. Looking west, they could see, below them in a haze of light, lowlands and broad meads, and glinting far off in the westering sun the wide waters of the Anduin. "Here, alas, I must do you a discourtesy," said Faramir. "I hope you will pardon it to one who has so far made his orders give way to courtesy as to not slay you or bind you. But it is a command that no stranger, not even one of Rohan that fights with us, shall see the path we now go with open eyes. I must blindfold you." "As you will," said Frodo. "Even the elves do likewise at need, and blindfolded we crossed the borders of fair Lothlorien. Gimli the dwarf took it ill, but the hobbits endured it." "It is to no place so fair that I shall lead you," said Faramir, "but I am glad that you will take this willingly and not by force." He called softly, and immediately Mablung and Damrod stepped out of the trees and came back to him. "Blindfold these guests," said Faramir, "securely, but not so as to discomfort them. Do not tie their hands. They will give their word not to try and see. I should trust them to shut their eyes of their own accord, but eyes will blink if the feet stumble. Lead them so they do not falter." With green scarves, the two guards now bound up the hobbits' eyes, and drew their hoods down almost to their mouths. Then quickly they took each one by the hand and went on their way. All that Frodo and Sam knew of this last mile of the road they learned from guessing in the dark. After a little they found that they were on a path descending steeply. Soon it grew so narrow that they went in single file, brushing a stony wall on either side. Their guards steered them from behind with hands laid firmly on their shoulders. Now and again they came to rough places, and were lifted from their feet for a while, and then set down again. Always the noise of the running water was on their right hand, and it grew nearer and louder. At length they were halted. Quickly Mablung and Damrod turned them about several times, and they lost all sense of direction. They climbed upwards a little. It seemed cold, and the noise of the stream had become faint. Then they were picked up and carried down many steps, and round a corner. Suddenly they heard the water again, loud now, rushing and splashing. All around them it seemed, and they felt a fine rain on their hands and cheeks. At last they were set on their feet once more. For a moment they stood so, half fearful, blindfold, not knowing where they were, and no one spoke. Then came the voice of Faramir close behind. "Let them see," he said. The scars were removed and their hoods drawn back, and they blinked and gasped. They stood on a wet floor of polished stone, and the doorstep, as it were, of a rough-hewn gate of rock opening dark behind them. But in front a thin veil of water was hung, so near that Frodo could have put an outstretched arm into it. It faced westward. The level shafts of the setting sun behind beat upon it, and the red light was broken into many flickering beams of ever-changing color. It was as if they stood at the window of some elven tower, curtained with threaded jewels of silver and gold and ruby, sapphire and amethyst, all kindled with an unconsuming fire. "At least by good chance we came at the right hour to reward you for your patience," said Faramir. "This is the window of the sunset, Henneth Anwen, fairest of all the falls of Ithilien, land of many fountains. Few strangers have ever seen it, but there is no kingly hall behind to match it. Enter now and see." Even as he spoke, the sun sank, and the fire faded in the flowing water. They turned and passed under the low, forbidding arch. At once they found themselves in a rock chamber, wide and rough, with an uneven, stooping roof. A few torches were kindled and cast a dim light on the glistening walls. Many men were already there. Others were still coming in by twos and threes through a dark, narrow door on one side. As their eyes grew accustomed to the gloom, the hobbits saw that the cave was larger than they had guessed, and was filled with a great store of arms and victuals. "Well, here is our refuge," said Faramir. "Not a place of great ease, but here you may pass the night in peace. It is dry at least, and there is food, though no fire. At one time the water flowed down through this cave and out of the arch, but its course was changed further up the gorge, by workmen of old, and the stream sent down in a fall of doubled height over the rocks far above. All the ways into this grot were then sealed against the entry of water or aught else, save one. There were now but two ways out, that passage yonder by which you entered blindfold, and through the window curtain into a deep bowl filled with knives of stone. Now rest a while, until the evening meal is set." The hobbits were taken to a corner and given a low bed to lie on if they wished. Meanwhile men busied themselves about the cave quietly and in orderly quickness. Light tables were taken from the walls and set up on trestles and laden with gear. This was plain and unadorned for the most part, but all well and fairly made. Round platters, bowls, and dishes of glazed brown clay or turned boxwood, smooth and clean. Here and there was a cup or basin of polished bronze, and a goblet of plain silver was set by the captain's seat in the middle of the inmost table. Faramir went about among the men, questioning each as he came in a soft voice. Some came back from the pursuit of the Southrons. Others, left behind as scouts near the road, came in latest. All the Southrons had been accounted for, save only the great Mumak. What happened to him none could say. Of the enemy no movement could be seen. Not even an orc spy was abroad. "You saw and heard nothing, Anborn?" Faramir asked of the latest comer. "Well, no, lord," said the lad, "no orc at least. But I saw, or thought I saw, something a little strange. It was getting deep dusk when the eyes make things greater than they should be, so perhaps it may have been no more than a squirrel." Sam pricked up his ears at this. "Yet if so, it was a black squirrel, and I saw no tail. It was like a shadow on the ground, and it whisked behind a tree trunk when I drew nigh, and went up aloft as swift as any squirrel could. You will not have us slay wild beasts for no purpose, and it seemed no more, so I tried no arrow. It was too dark for sure shooting anyway, and the creature was gone into the gloom of the leaves in a twinkling. But I stayed for a while, for it seemed strange, and then I hastened back. I thought I heard the thing hiss at me from high above as I turned away. A large squirrel, maybe. Perhaps under the shadow of the unnamed, some of the beasts of Mirkwood are wandering hither to our woods. They have black squirrels there, 'tis said." "Perhaps," said Faramir, "but that would be an ill omen if it was so. We do not want the escapes of Mirkwood in Ithilien." Sam fancied that he gave a swift glance towards the hobbits as he spoke, but Sam said nothing. For a while he and Frodo lay back and watched the torchlight, and the men moving to and fro, speaking in hushed voices. Then suddenly Frodo fell asleep. Sam struggled with himself, arguing this way and that. "He may be all right," he thought, "and then he may not. Fair speech may hide a foul heart." He yawned. "I could sleep for a week, and I'd be better for it. And what can I do if I do keep awake, me all alone, and all these great men about? Nothing, Sam Gamgee, but you've got to keep awake all the same." And somehow he managed it. The light faded from the cave door, and the grey veil of falling water grew dim and was lost in gathering shadow. Always the sound of water went on, never changing its note, morning or evening or night. It murmured and whispered of sleep. Sam stuck his knuckles in his eyes. Now more torches were being lit. A cask of wine was broached. Storage barrels were being opened. Men were fetching water from the fall. Some were laving their hands in basins. A wide copper bowl and a white cloth were brought to Faramir, and he washed. "Wake our guests," he said, "and take them water. It is time to eat." Frodo sat up and yawned and stretched. Sam, not used to being waited on, looked with some surprise at the tall man who bowed, holding a basin of water before him. "Put it on the ground, master, if you please," he said. "Easier for me and for you." Then, to the astonishment and amusement of the men, he plunged his head into the cold water and splashed his neck and ears. "Is it the custom in your land to wash the head before supper?" said the man who waited on the hobbits. "No, before breakfast," said Sam. "But if you're short of cold water, on the neck's like a ring on wilted lettuce. There, now I can keep awake long enough to eat a bit." They were led then to seats beside Faramir, barrels covered with pelts and high enough above the benches of men for their convenience. Before they ate, Faramir and all his men turned and faced west in a moment of silence. Faramir signed to Frodo and Sam that they should do likewise. "So we always do," he said as they sat down. "We look towards Numenor that was, and beyond to Elvenhome that is, and to that which is beyond Elvenhome and never will be. Have you no such custom at meat?" "No," said Frodo, feeling strangely rustic and untutored. "But if we are guests, we bow to our host, and after we have eaten we rise and thank him." "That we do also," said Faramir. After so long journeying and camping, and days spent in the lonely wild, the evening meal seemed a feast to the hobbits. To drink pale yellow wine, cool and fragrant, and eat bread and butter, and salted meats, and dried fruits, and good red cheese, with clean hands and clean knives and plates. Neither Frodo nor Sam refused anything that was offered, nor a second, nor indeed a third helping. The wine coursed in their veins and tired limbs, and they felt glad and easy of heart, as they had not done since they left the land of Lorien. When all was done, Faramir led them to a recess at the back of the cave, partly screened by curtains, and a chair and 2 stools were brought there. A little earthenware lamp burned in a niche. "You may soon desire to sleep," he said, "and especially good Samwise, who would not close his eyes before he ate. Whether for fear of blunting the edge of a noble hunger, or for fear of me, I do not know. But it is not good to sleep too soon after meat, and that following a fast. Let us talk a while. On your journey from Rivendell there must have been many things to tell, and you, too, would perhaps wish to learn something of us, and the lands where you now are. Tell me of Boromir, my brother, and of old Mithrandir, and of the fair people of Lothlorien." Frodo no longer felt sleepy, and he was willing to talk. But though the food and wine had put him at his ease, he had not lost all his caution. Sam was beaming and humming to himself, but when Frodo spoke he was at first content to listen, only occasionally venturing to make an explanation of agreement. Frodo told many tales, yet always he steered the matter away from the quest of the company and from the ring, enlarging rather on the valiant part Boromir had played in all their adventures, with the wolves of the wild, in the snows under Carithras, and in the mines of Moria where Gandalf fell. Faramir was most moved by the story of the fight on the bridge. "It must have irked Boromir to run from orcs," he said, "or even from the fell thing you named, the Balrog, even though he was the last to leave." "He was the last," said Frodo, "but Aragorn was forced to lead us. He alone knew the way after Gandalf's fall. But had there not been us lesser folk to care for, I do not think that either he or Boromir would have fled." "Maybe it would have been better had Boromir fallen there with Mithrandir," said Faramir, "and had not gone on to the fate that waited above the falls of Rauros." "Maybe. But tell me now of your own fortunes," said Frodo, turning the matter aside once again. "For I would learn more of Minas Ithil, and Osgiliath, and Minas Tirith, the long-enduring. What hope have you for that city in your long war?" "What hope have we?" said Faramir. "It is long since we have had any hope. The sword of Elendil, if it returns indeed, may rekindle it, but I do not think it will do more than put off the evil day, unless other help unlooked for also comes, from elves or men. For the enemy increases and we decrease. We are a failing people, a springless autumn. The men of Numenor were settled far and wide on the shores and seaward regions of the great lands, but for the most part they fell into evils and follies. Many became enamored of the darkness and the black arts. Some were given over wholly to idleness and ease, and some fought among themselves until they were conquered in their weakness by the wild men. It is not said that evil arts were ever practiced in Gondor, or that the Nameless One, was ever named in honor there, and the old wisdom and beauty brought out of the west remain long in the realm of the sons of Elendil the Fair, and they linger there still. Yet even so it was Gondor that brought about its own decay, falling by degrees into dotage, and thinking that the enemy was asleep, who was only banished, not destroyed. Death was ever present, because the Númenóreans still, as they had in their old kingdom and so lost it, hungered after endless life unchanging. Kings made tombs more splendid than houses of the living, and counted old names in the rolls of their descent dearer than the names of sons. Childless lords sat in aged halls musing on heraldry. In secret chambers withered men compounded strong elixirs, or in high cold towers asked questions of the stars. And the last king of the line of Anarion had no heir. But the stewards were wiser and more fortunate. Wiser, for they recruited the strength of our people from the sturdy folk of the sea-coast, and of the hardy mountaineers of Ered Nimris. And they made a truce with the proud peoples of the north, who often had assailed us, men of fierce valour, but our kin from afar off, unlike the wild Easterlings, or the crude Haradrim. So it came to pass in the days of Cirion the 12th Steward, and my father's the 6th and 20th, that they rode to our aid, and at the great field of Celebrant they destroyed our enemies that had seized our northern provinces. These are the Rohirrim, as we name them, master of horses, and we ceded to them the fields of Calenarthon that are since called Rohan, for that province had long been sparsely peopled. And they became our allies, and have ever proved true to us, aiding us at need and guarding our northern marches and the gap of Rohan. Of our lord manners they have learned what they would, and the lords speak our speech at need. Yet for the most part they hold by the ways of their own fathers, and to their own memories, and they speak among themselves their own north tongue. And we love them, tall men and fair women, valiant both alike, golden-haired, bright-eyed, and strong. They remind us of the youth of men as they were in the elder days. Indeed, it is said by our lore-masters that they have from of old this affinity with us, that they are come from these same 3 houses of men, as were the Númenóreans in their beginning. Not from Hador the golden-haired, the elf-friend, maybe, yet from such of his sons and people as went not over sea into the west, refusing the call. For so we reckon men in our lore, calling them the High, or men of the west, which were Númenóreans, and the middle peoples, men of the twilight, such as are the Rohirrim and their kin that dwell still far in the north, and the wild, the men of darkness. Yet now if the Rohirrim are grown in some ways more like to us, enhanced in arts and gentleness, we too have become more like to them, and can scarce claim any longer the title High. We have become middlemen of the twilight, but with memory of other things. For as the Rohirrim do, we now love war and valour as things good in themselves, both a sport and an end. And though we still hold that a warrior should have more skills and knowledge than only the craft of weapons and slaying, we esteem a warrior none the less above men of other crafts. Such is the need of our days. So even was my brother, Boromir, a man of prowess, and for that he was accounted the best man in Gondor. And very valiant indeed he was. No heir of Minas Tirith has for long years been so hardy in toil, so onward into battle, or blown a mightier note on the great horn. Faramir sighed and fell silent for a while. "You don't say much in all your tales about the elves, sir," said Sam, suddenly plucking up courage. He had noted that Faramir seemed to refer to elves with reverence, and this even more than his courtesy, and his food and wine, had won Sam's respect and quieted his suspicions. "No, indeed, Master Samwise," said Faramir, "for I am not learned in elven lore. But there you touch upon another point in which we have changed, declining from Númenor to Middle-earth. For as you may know, if Mithrandir was your companion, and you have spoken with Elrond, the Edain, the fathers of the Númenóreans, fought beside the elves in the first wars, and were rewarded by the gift of the kingdom in the midst of the sea, within sight of Elvenhome. But in Middle-earth men and elves became estranged in the days of darkness, by the arts of the enemy, and by the slow changes of time in which each kind walk further down the sundered roads. Men now fear and misdoubt the elves, and yet know little of them. And we of Gondor grow like other men, like the men of Rohan, for even they who are foes of the Dark Lord shun the elves, and speak of the Golden Wood with dread. Yet there are among us still some who have had dealings with the elves when they may, and ever and anon one will go in secret to Lorien, seldom to return. Not I, for I deem it perilous now for mortal man wilfully to seek out the elder people. Yet I envy you that you have spoken with the White Lady. The Lady of Lorien, Galadriel, cried Sam. You should see her, indeed you should, sir. I am only a hobbit, and gardening's my job at home, sir, if you understand me, and I'm not much good at poetry. Not at making it, a bit of comic rhyme perhaps now and again, but not real poetry, so I can't tell you what I mean. It ought to be sung. You'd have to get Strider, Aragorn that is, or old Mr. Bilbo for that. But I wish I could make a song about her. Beautiful she is, sir, lovely. Sometimes like a great tree in flower, sometimes like a white daffodilly, small and slender like, hard as diamonds, soft as moonlight, warm as sunlight, cold as frost in the stars, proud and far off as a snow mountain, and as merry a lass as I ever saw, with daisies in her hair in springtime. But that's a lot of nonsense, and wide of my mark. Then she must be lovely indeed, said Faramir, perilously fair. I don't know about perilous, said Sam. It strikes me that folks takes the power with them into Lorien, and finds it there because they brought it. But perhaps you could call her perilous, because she's so strong in herself. You could dash yourself to pieces on her, like a ship on a rock, or drown yourself like a hobbit in a river. But neither rock nor river would be to blame. Now, He stopped and went red in the face. Yes, now Boromir, you would say, said Faramir. What would you say? He took his power with him? Yes, sir, begging your pardon, and a fine man as your brother was, if I may say so. But you've been warm on the scent all along. Now I watch Boromir and listen to him from Rivendell all down the road, looking after my master, as you'll understand, and not meaning any harm to Boromir. And it's my opinion that in Lorien he first saw clearly what I guessed sooner, what he wanted. From the moment he first saw it, he wanted the enemy's ring. Sam! Cried Frodo, aghast. He had fallen deep into his own thoughts for a while, and came out of them suddenly and too late. Save me, said Sam, turning white, and then flushing scarlet. There I go again. Whenever you open your big mouth, you put your foot in it, the gaffer used to say to me, and right enough. Oh dear. Now look here, sir. He turned, facing up to Faramir with all the courage that he could muster. Don't you go taking advantage of my master because his servant's no better than a fool. You've spoken very handsome all along, put me off my guard, talking of elves and all, but handsome is as handsome does, we say. Now here's a chance to show your quality. So it seems, said Faramir slowly and very softly, with a strange smile. So that is the answer to all the riddles. The one ring that was thought to have perished from the world. And Boromir tried to take it by force, and you escaped, and ran all the way to me. And here in the wild I have you, 2 halflings and a host of men in my call, and the ring of rings. A pretty stroke of fortune, a chance for Faramir, captain of Gondor, to show his quality. Ha! He stood up, very tall and stern, his grey eyes glinting. Frodo and Sam sprang from their stools and set themselves side by side with their backs to the wall, fumbling for their sword hilts. There was a silence. All the men in the cave stopped talking and looked towards them in wonder. But Faramir sat down again in his chair and began to laugh quietly, and then suddenly became grave again. Alas for Boromir! It was too sore a trial, he said. How you have increased my sorrow, you 2 strange wanderers from a far country, bearing the peril of men. But you are less judges of men than I of halflings. We are truth-speakers, we men of Gondor. We boast seldom, and then perform or die in the attempt. Not if I found it on the highway would I take it, I said, even if I was such a man as to desire this thing, and even though I know not clearly what this thing was when I spoke, still I should take these words as a vow, and be held by them. But I am not such a man, or I am wise enough to know that there are some perils from which a man must flee. Sit at peace, and be comforted, Samwise. If you seem to have stumbled, think that it was fated to be so. Your heart is shrewd as well as faithful, and saw clearer than your eyes. For strange though it may seem, it was safe to declare this to me. It may even help the master that you love. It shall turn to his good, if it is in my power. So be comforted, but do not even name this thing aloud again. Once is enough. The hobbits came back to their seats and sat very quiet. Men turned back to their drink and their talk, perceiving that their captain had had some jest or other with the little guests, and that it was over. Well, Frodo, at least now we understand one another, said Faramir. If you took this thing on yourself, unwilling, at others' asking, then you have pity and honour from me. And I marvel at you, to keep it hid and not to use it. You are a new people and a new world to me. Are all your kin of like sort? Your land must be a realm of peace and content, and there must be gardeners in high honour. Not all is well there, said Frodo, but certainly gardeners are honoured. But folks must grow weary there, even in their gardens, as do all things under the sun of this world. And you are far from home and wayworn. No more tonight. Sleep, both of you, in peace if you can. Fear not. I do not wish to see it, or touch it, or to know more of it than I know, which is enough, lest peril perchance waylay me, and I fall lower in the test than Frodo, son of Drogo. Go now to rest, but first tell me only, if you will, whither you wish to go and what to do. For I must watch and wait and think. Time passes. In the morning we must each go swiftly on the ways appointed to us. Frodo had felt himself trembling as the first shock of fear passed. Now a great weariness came down upon him like a cloud. He could dissemble and resist no longer. "I was going to find a way into Mordor," he said faintly. "I was going to Gorgoroth. I must find the mountain of fire and cast the thing into the gulf of doom. Gandalf said so. I do not think I shall ever get there." Faramir stared at him for a moment in grave astonishment. Then suddenly he caught him as he swayed, and lifting him gently, carried him to the bed, and laid him there, and covered him warmly. At once he fell into a deep sleep. Another bed was set beside him for a servant. Sam hesitated for a moment, then bowing very low. "Good night, Captain, my lord," he said. "You took the chance, sir." "Did I so?" said Faramir. "Yes, sir, and showed your quality, the very highest." Faramir smiled. "A pert servant, Master Samwise. But nay, the praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards. Yet there was naught in this to praise. I had no lure or desire to do other than I have done." "Ah, well, sir," said Sam, "you said my master had an elvish air, and that was good and true. But I can say this. You have an air too, sir, that reminds me of Gandalf, of wizards." "Maybe," said Faramir. "Maybe you discern from far away the air of Numenor. Good night." Thank you for tuning in. Join us next time for Chapter 6 in Book 4 of The Two Towers. Good night, Flagstaff.